On today's show, we're talking about why Jacob deGrom is starting the season at the back of the Rangers rotation and why it actually might make some sense. All that and more on this episode of Locked On Rangers. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Rangers, your daily Texas Rangers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are locked onto the Texas Rangers, the first and best daily Rangers podcast. I'm Bryce Patrick, a cripplingly addicted Texas Rangers fan, covering this team for 11 seasons, including all 6 as the founder and host of this podcast. Thank y'all so much for making Locked On Rangers your first listen every single day. If not already, you can follow me on Twitter at Bryce Patrick. You can follow the show at Locked On Rangers. Hit subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform and on YouTube, where the best way you can help grow the show is to comment nearly any single thing below. On today's show, we're talking about the Rangers all but officially naming an opening day starter, why Jacob deGrom is starting the season in the back of the Rangers rotation, and looking a little bit more closely about how often and when specifically he might pitch in Major League regular season games. Let's get into Nathan Eovaldi having a good start on the B game in Monday's game. I really wish that was the A game. I mean, a whole lot more interesting pitchers through in that A game. Also, Evan Carter having himself a nice day. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But Nathan Eovaldi going all the way up to 4 innings pitched in that game against the Royals on the B side. No stats, no video, a little bit of video from the beat writers, but no StatCast TrackMan data on that outing, but 61 pitches for Nathan Eovaldi, 4 shutout innings, 4 hits allowed, 4 strikeouts, 1 walk, and he looked fantastic on his way to being the opening day starter because Jacob deGrom apparently is going to start the season in the back of the Rangers rotation. Now, the Rangers haven't officially come out and said Nathan Eovaldi is our opening day starter, but I don't know why. It was literally just a question between Nathan Eovaldi and Jacob deGrom. I don't see any scenario where, as much as I love Cody Bradford, he starts opening day. I don't think that's going to happen. I highly doubt it's going to be Tyler Mahle. I highly doubt it's going to be John Gray. It's going to be Nathan Eovaldi. Just say it. Just say it with your chest, okay? There's no need to be dramatic about all this because Jacob deGrom is apparently going to start the season in the back of the Rangers rotation. Now, he did throw a live batting practice to hitters for the first time this spring on March 1st. He threw 25 pitches in that session. He is going to make his Cactus League debut on Friday. Finally, we are going to get to see him at the Rockies. I don't know if this will be televised. I'm sure that the Rangers will have a bunch of their social cameras, trying to clip off every single pitch that Jacob deGrom throws. Really wish that this was in a televised game. Better at least have TrackMan StatCast data, or I'm going to be furious. But Jacob deGrom is finally going to throw. I would assume he'd throw somewhere around 40-ish pitches. I mean, it's a little bit less than a week. It's 6 days after his last bullpen. I don't know if he's going to throw any live BPs between now and when he throws on Friday, but I think that kind of gives the Rangers a tentative schedule of when he's going to pitch. Now, they have talked about him starting in the back, towards the back of the Rangers rotation, not necessarily the 5th spot for sure, because the Rangers opened the season on March 27th against the Red Sox. That's almost assuredly going to be Nathan Eovaldi's start. Now, they have 4 games in that first set. I'm really glad, because a lot of times when you play on opening day, you'll have that Friday off, which I just hate. It's like, oh, hey, season started. Just kidding. Here's your first off day immediately. No, 4 games right off the rip. I would think, for me, if it were me planning Jacob deGrom's first outing, I would say that first Sunday, the 4th game of the season, March 30th against the Boston Red Sox at home, Sunday afternoon game. I think that makes the most sense for him to start his season, because the Rangers then immediately go on a quick road trip to Cincinnati, a very homer-friendly ballpark, a park that's going to be very, very cold. The Rangers have talked a little bit about protecting his arm and, not trying to throw him in more difficult environments. Ohio's still very cold in early April and the very end of March. So is Chicago, where the Rangers take their next trip. I mean, they have another series right after that. I would assume about once a week early on is about how often we're going to see Jacob deGrom. I kind of tentatively mapped out those first 10 starts. So if that first start is the 30th against Boston at home, then you give them a whole week off. The Rangers have an off day. They can kind of, play with the rotation enough early on that, say he pitches the 6th against the Rays. I think that would make a lot of sense. Then the Rangers go travel to Chicago. They have another off day on that Thursday, April 10th. Then you throw them on a week's rest, the final game of that series in Seattle on Sunday, the 13th. Then the Rangers have another off day on Monday, so it'd be pretty easy for the Rangers to kind of finagle that rotation. Then throw him on the 20th, again, another Sunday against the Dodgers. That's the first 4 starts of his season that will be on a week's rest, and the Rangers wouldn't have to manipulate the rotation too much to kind of make that happen. I think that is something that makes a whole lot of sense. Then the first time he'd throw on less than a week's rest, you throw him that road trip to the Bay Area. They got 3 games against Oakland. I wouldn't waste a Jacob deGrom start against the Oakland A's. That's another thing, where the Rangers are timing out these starts. Don't use your Jacob deGrom bullets, fruitlessly. Don't use them on teams that are bad, terrible. Use them in games that matter. If you got a chance to alter your rotation just slightly so that Jacob deGrom is pitching in not every series that matters most, but at least most of them. I mean, the series against the Mariners and against the Astros, you want to have a Jacob deGrom start in there every single one of those series if you can. If you can just slightly tweak your rotation enough, because again, they are so valuable, these starts by him. Even if he's only going 5 innings, they are 5 of the best innings you're ever going to see. And if you can do it against the Mariners, who you're going to be fighting for an AL West title with early on in the season, you should do that. If you're going to do it against a team in the Boston Red Sox that you're going to be fighting for an AL wildcard spot, possibly with them, you should do that. Same with the Rays. Same with the Dodgers, who are going to be very, very tough. You throw them again on that next Sunday on the 20th at home, that's a very, very tough lineup. That's the team that's going to be very, very tough to beat. If you throw Jacob deGrom out there, you got a chance to beat them. Then you go, don't waste him on that series against the A's. You throw him the 26th against the Giants. There we go. We're already at 5 starts. We're already through that first month of the season. Hopefully he's still healthy. He's only had 1 start where he's only on 6 days rest as opposed to a full week. Then you throw him another week's rest. They're still having no days off. That's a long stretch from the very end of April to May the 4th, Star Wars Day, if you're into that sort of thing. Then you have another series against Seattle early on in May. You could throw him in that series as well. I mean, all of these games lining it up to that first series of the year with Rangers play the Astros. It's a 4-game set at home. You have to throw him in that series. You cannot go 4 games against the Astros and not throw Jacob deGrom. Ideally, you'd like to throw both of deGrom and Eovaldi in those series against the Mariners, against the Astros. Both of those series, every single one of those series against those teams are going to be doubly important. I mean, this is going to be an incredibly tight race in the AL West. Maybe it's not. Maybe the Astros are finally cooked. Maybe that's the case, but probably not. They have been such a bear. Even last year, when it seemed like they were completely dead in the water, they still came back to life. I know they lost Bregman this year. I know they lost Kyle Tucker. I know they added a few guys that are probably fine. Christian Walker's a good player, and Isaac Paredes will probably thrive in Houston. Have at least, I think, probably 5 more home runs than he would have anywhere else with that tiny little Crawford boxes and how much he pulls the ball at an insane rate. But this is going to be a tight race. I know Seattle didn't do basically anything this offseason. Their pitching staff is still by far the best in the league. I mean, legitimately 5, 6, 7 deep of not just okay starters, not just competent starters, but good starters and a deep bullpen. And they got Randy Arozarena for a full year. Maybe Julio Rodriguez will bounce back to being an elite player like we saw him his first year. A little bit less so last year, a little bit less so his sophomore year where he had that sophomore slump, but he's still a very good player. Cal Raleigh is still a very good player. And, hopefully for them, for their sake, J.P. Crawford kind of bounces back to more of what they thought, but they're still, even with all those offensive deficiencies, they were still not that far out of a playoff spot last year, not that far out of an AL West title last year. And this Rangers squad, they're coming off a really rough year. They did a lot of things well. I think they will bounce back pretty nicely, but this is still going to be a very, very tight race in the AL West. And you start looking at some of those other series, then you throw them early on in that Astros series, then you throw them on the road against the Yankees, then you throw them against the Blue Jays. I mean, that's 10 starts in the month of May. There you go. There's 10 of your. He's hoping for 30. I'm hoping for 25 starts out of Jacob deGrom. Probably the first 2 months of the season, you're not going to see him go much more than 5 innings. I don't see that happening. Maybe he only goes 4 innings. I doubt they'll be that tight on him, but I think right around 5, definitely no more than 6, unless he's really, really cruising, really, really efficient. I don't see that happening until the later part of the season when he is more built up, when they are more confident that, okay, this guy really can withstand that workload, because he's pitched just so infrequently the last couple of years. But you forget until you see it on the mound how incredibly important this guy is, how incredibly good this guy is. That's why you treat every single one of these starts like it may be his last. I mean, maybe because it could be, and maybe because they're just so darn good, so darn important, that you cannot afford to waste a single one of his starts, because they are all electric, must-watch TV, and they are your best chance to win baseball games. So why not use them against the best teams? Now, coming up, we're going to talk a little bit about Jake Burger, improving that defense, and some fight for the closer's role. A guy who you might not have expected heading into the spring training, but I think should have a real shot at the closer's role, if not to start the season, then definitely by season's end, or maybe even next year. Talk about all that and more right after this. Shout out to the Everydayers for making Locked On Rangers your first listen every single day. We're back on tomorrow's show, probably talking more about this Adolis Garcia injury that literally just broke as I started recording. We'll know a little bit more tomorrow, because literally as I paused this to take a break during these ad reads, I saw that Adolis Garcia had been scratched from today's game with a left oblique issue. He is going to take an MRI. He complained about it this morning, and so Bruce Bochy said they are going to go and get him checked out. Again, the oblique injuries take about, on average, if they are minor, anywhere between 4 weeks and 5 weeks, depending on what's going on there. Thankfully, we should see Wyatt Langford at some point soon. We didn't see him in today's lineup, even though they talked yesterday about seeing him. Actually, I think they talked on Sunday, Bruce Bochy did, about seeing Wyatt Langford early on in the week. Well, today's Tuesday. This is the early point in the week. Wednesday is midweek, so he is a little delayed from that. Wyatt Langford also dealing with an oblique issue. Thankfully, his not too worrisome. It takes around 3-4 weeks for those, but him coming back to baseball activities, we are now, I believe, 8 days removed, maybe 9 days removed. I think it was last Sunday that Wyatt Langford suffered that oblique issue. And so hopefully for Adolis Garcia, it is just a little bit of a tweak, no strain, no nothing like that. That is what we are hoping for. If not, we could see some more Kevin Pillar. We've already seen him quite a bit this spring training. We could see him on the opening day roster. I've really loved what I've seen from Kevin Pillar so far this spring. I thought that was a great signing. I thought that it was honestly baffling that the Angels didn't trade him at the deadline last year, especially when he said, hey, I'm going to retire at the end of this year. Thankfully, he didn't. Thankfully, he started a llama farm and came to Texas and said, hey, I want to play some baseball. I'm not quite ready to hang it up just yet. He's absolutely crushed lefties in his career, especially last year. He was phenomenal against lefties. The Rangers could use another outfielder who could play center field and also just mash it against left-handed pitching. But, one of their lefties who they are hoping can start to hit left-handed pitching a little bit better is Evan Carter, who had himself a pretty good day in the B game, had a ringing double off of the wall against a right-handed pitcher. I can't remember exactly who that was for the Royals, but he also had a hit against a lefty, Angel Zerpa, the left-handed relief pitcher, chucking that ball in the upper 90s. A Zerp dog, if you will, if you're nasty, if you are a big Royals fan. That is how some of them refer to Angel Zerpa. Honestly, I love that nickname, just Zerp dog, just so fun to say. But seeing him get a hit against a lefty is a very, very good thing. I know it's spring training. I know stats don't really matter all that much, but just seeing him go the opposite field, just slap a ball to the outfield, you don't have to do damage against left-handed pitching. You don't have to absolutely crush it, but for Evan, he's just seen so few lefties in his career. He's still so incredibly young. He has been a professional baseball player for really not that long. I mean, he's 22 years old this season. He still has a lot of baseball ahead of him. He missed 3/4 of last year, so that would have been a lot of development that he could have had against lefties. Also, when he was playing last year, he was fighting through that back issue. We'll see how many lefties he actually gets to face. I'm sure that he'll get some starts against lefties this season because he just needs to get better. I really think it's just a matter of him facing lefties because he hasn't had that many opportunities. I talked about it a lot. There aren't that many good lefties in the minor leagues in terms of starting pitchers or even relief pitchers. Because if you're a good lefty, you're going to get called up a whole lot faster because there are just fewer lefties in general. I mean, about 24% of the league's pitchers are left-handed. So again, if you're going to be a platoon player, and if he eventually is only going to play against right-handed pitchers, if you could only pick one type of handed pitchers that you could face, righties would be the choice. But he just needs to get those reps. We'll see how many of them he gets this year. I would assume he's probably going to play 100 to 120, maybe 125 games because of that chronic back issue. They are trying to treat it with rest and not pushing him too hard. I've talked a little bit, I think, on Monday's show. Maybe it was last week's show about why Wyatt Langford. I think it was actually Friday's show of last week. Why Wyatt Langford should probably be playing every day in center field just to kind of take that load off of Evan Carter's back. But seeing him get a hit off of lefty, and not just some random minor league lefty, but Angel Zerba is a very, very good reliever, a very good left-handed on left-handed reliever. Lefties have a hard time hitting him. He's got a fastball, he's got a slider. It makes life difficult. And just seeing Evan Carter put together those processes of having some better at-bats, having some more success against lefties. He's had a couple of really, really ugly at-bats against lefties this spring, but seeing him put together some better ones, would have loved for that game to be televised, or at least some kind of box score stats or StatCast or whatever data other than what the beats are tweeting out would have been very, very nice. But I'm excited for Evan Carter, and I think a lot of the question marks about him hitting lefties, I think they're overblown. The questions about his back, that's legitimate. The questions of how good can Evan Carter eventually be, how high is his ceiling, how much can he contribute in 2025 and beyond, I think the back health is going to play a lot bigger factor of that, and a lot bigger role in what determines his future, his ceiling, and how much he impacts this franchise for the next four years until he hits free agency, maybe 10 years. Who knows how long he'll end up being here? I'm hoping it is a long, long time. I'm hoping it is a very successful tenure, that is just the first of many World Series that he will win in 2023. But I'm excited to see what Evan Carter can do against those left-handed pitchers. I know it's literally tiny sample size, but that's what we have for Evan Carter, is a tiny sample size of his professional career, and especially his professional career against lefties. He just needs those reps. He just needs to figure it out in games. That's really the only way to go about it, and I'm excited to see what he can do. I'm also excited for Jake Burger. I have a terrifying Photoshop of Jake Burger that I am waiting to unveil until his next spring training home run. But we have seen some good things from Jake Burger, some incredible exit velocities, which we expected. That's what Jake Burger does. He hits baseballs hard and he gives good vibes. But he hasn't really particularly played defense well. Not at third base, not at first base. But that's about it. I think he's played a couple innings at second base in his career. I highly doubt that will happen in 2025 with the Rangers. But apparently he's been getting a whole lot better. He's made a couple of really, really great rangy plays at first base, going a long, long distance and making some over-the-shoulder catches, flashing that leather, making some good picks and things like that. And that scene in Moneyball where they're trying to I can't even remember who exactly it is. Scott Hatteberg, I think they're trying to turn into a first baseman, and the quote is, "Wash, tell him it's not hard," and Wash says, "It's incredibly hard." Well, maybe Ron Washington bit off a little bit. Maybe he was talking a little bit too much. Maybe it is hard to cheat someone defense at first base, but maybe that's just for everybody outside of Corey Ragsdale, because the Rangers infield defense coordinator, the Rangers first base coach, has been an absolute godsend of helping Rangers improve their defense on the infield, specifically at first base. Specifically, this is now two guys that had reputations as not just, below average, but pretty terrible to, at times, horrific defenders at first base. Nathaniel Lowe was described by the great tepid participation defensively as a scarecrow with a baseball mitt on it at first base heading into after the 2022 season. I mean, he was terrible, and Lowe would be the first one to admit it. And now is a huge credit to, not just Corey Ragsdale, but mainly to Nathaniel Lowe of how hard he worked on his glove, how much better he got defensively at first base, from by far the worst defender in the league, if not the sport, at first base, to a Gold Glover, and not just a Gold Glover they just gave out because the guy hit a bunch of home runs and they knew who he was and all right, you're fine enough at defense, we'll give you a Gold Glove. That was a well-earned Gold Glove for Nathaniel Lowe in 2023 at first base. And Jake Burger was also not a good defender, but he has been making a whole lot more plays defensively at first base. I thought the Rangers would really miss Nathaniel Lowe's defense at first base. His offense, he had some offensive skills. He just got a little expensive. The Rangers kind of did a similar thing as they did with Nathaniel Lowe when they first traded for him. A guy with a whole bunch of years of control with some question marks and said, hey, we think that you guys don't value this guy enough. We'll give up a couple of mid-tier prospects and go after a guy who we think could really, make our team a whole lot better and, be pretty cost effective and cost controlled and team controlled for a long time. I think they just kind of did that again in the Jake Burger trade. And it seems like Corey Ragsdale has figured out the secret sauce of taking a not good defender at first base and making them at least passable to maybe even pretty good defenders at first base. I never really thought that Jake Burger couldn't figure it out. I mean, it's incredibly hard to be a defender at any big league position, but first base is definitely something that guys can figure out, and whatever it is that Corey Ragsdale is teaching these guys how to play defense at first base, it is absolutely working. But speaking of Nathaniel Lowe, the guy who he was traded for, almost retired from baseball, I'm very glad he didn't, because he might just be the Rangers closer this season. We're talking a little bit about Robert Garcia and another candidate for the Rangers closer in Marc Church, lighting up the radar gun and making opposing hitters look silly. Why I think he absolutely needs to make this opening day roster. We'll talk about that and more right after this. This show is brought to you by FanDuel. When the games tip off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can still stay in the action. I know I talked a little bit about how close this AL West is going to be. They've got all kinds of different odds on Major League Baseball, and right now the Astros are the favorites to win the AL West at plus 180, Rangers at plus 190, Mariners at plus 200. There is no division that's anywhere as close as this. There's not even a division where first and second place are as close as first and third place in this division. Just plus 20 is the difference. Plus 180 versus plus 200. Astros as the favorites, the Mariners as the third favorites. There's all kinds of different action. So check it all out at FanDuel.com. And right now, new FanDuel customers get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Now, we were talking about Rangers first base when we were talking about Nathaniel Lowe, and the guy who the Rangers traded him for, Robert Garcia. His baseline stats may not look as impressive with a 4.22 ERA last year, but you go to that Baseball Savant page, and it doesn't take long to see why the Rangers were so excited to trade for a guy with, I believe, 4 years of team control. He still has options. He's still going to be making around the league minimum this year, and he is much better than that 4.22 ERA might make you think. I mean, 75 strikeouts in just an out shy of 60 innings. You look at the expected ERA, you look at the chase rate, you look at the strikeout rate, the walk rate, the barrel rate, hard hit rate, all of those in the red. I mean, basically everything on his Baseball Savant page is in the red outside of fastball velocity. He's averaging 94.5 miles an hour, and that's about where he's been. But that changeup is just absolutely lethal. And he's also a left-handed pitcher, a nasty, nasty lefty. While his breaking ball isn't as good as his changeup, his fastball isn't as good as his changeup, which makes him much better against right-handed hitters than he is against left-handed hitters. He's still got that slider that can be an effective weapon against lefties. He's still a guy who looked incredible, struck out the side in that B game against the Royals. Again, Would have loved to have seen some StatCast data from that. Would have loved to have seen a little bit more video than just one of him making Jack Caglione, who is one of the Royals' top prospects and a left-handed hitter, with some big swing and some big swing and miss, look absolutely silly on what I believe was maybe a changeup, maybe a slider down below the zone. He just looked absolutely silly swinging through that pitch. But he talked to Rangers reporters about how, he almost retired from baseball a couple years back when he was, had a 5-something-ish ERA in Double-A and just seemed like, okay, this might be over for me. It might be time to go and call it quits. He had a 4.22 ERA last year, but he might have made the right decision, because after that season where he thought that it was over for him, he thought, this is it. I'm calling it quits. I'm not going to make the major leagues. I'm not going to, get that opportunity. He was selected by the Miami Marlins in the minor league portion of the Rule 5 draft, and he thought, okay, someone likes me. Someone thinks that I've got something to give. Somebody, a smart pitching development organization, sees something in me and thought, okay. He had already taken a desk job. He'd done it for a couple months, and he thought that, my time in baseball is done. But when the Marlins drafted him, he said, okay, I'm not ready to call it quits just yet. And last year, he looked absolutely fantastic. And granted, he hasn't had a whole lot of time in late leverage relief roles. He just have not pitched that much in the 9th inning, even in the 8th inning. Just hasn't pitched a whole lot of meaningful games, and well, there weren't a whole lot of those for the Nationals last year, but the games he has pitched in, he has looked very, very good. In the games he's pitched in the spring so far, he's looked pretty darn good, and while he hasn't had a whole lot of that time in those leverage relief roles, how do guys become closers? You got to give them a shot. Eventually, they get their shot. I mean, there's not a whole lot of guys with many saves on this team. Chris Martin, I believe, has the most. Luke Jackson has some save opportunities. He was very, very important to that Braves bullpen back in 2021 that won the World Series. I mean, he was fantastic in that 2021 World Series. I believe he pitched in 4 games, did not allow a single earned run against the Astros, helping the Braves take that World Series crown and denying the Astros one. Just... would love to see him do that, well, in the regular season against the Astros, and hopefully they just don't end up making the postseason this year. But I am getting sidetracked on my number one role as number one Astros hater. But Robert Garcia has done a good job this spring. He has got nasty, nasty stuff. I love the changeup. Love to see the slider be just a little bit better, but even without elite velocity, I mean, guys can be effective relievers, and he's averaging 94.5 miles an hour with his fastball, and that's not nothing. I mean, everybody's throwing incredibly hard these days, but that's not nothing, especially paired with that incredibly good changeup. I mean, he's got all kinds of swing and miss. He stays in the zone. He doesn't beat himself by walking the world. He's gotten rocked a little bit by hard contact, but a lot of that, inflated ERA last year was just from a couple of bad outings early on. That tends to happen with relievers. You got to look behind that. You got to look at stuff that is more predictive of stuff that he could do in the future. And that's elite swing and miss rate, that elite chase rate, that elite, weak contact rate. He's pretty good at getting ground balls as well. I mean, most things that you want pitchers to do well, he does well. I think he's definitely going to be fighting for that role as the Rangers closer. He said he wants that role. He said, but, ultimately, wherever Bruce Bochy wants to use me, I'm game for that. I mean, Bochy has been the master bullpen manipulator in his career. I mean, he took some time to learn the Rangers bullpen, their roles, and who was doing what in 2023. It was the Will Smith show as the only reliable bullpen option for the first couple of months of that 2023 season. Then we started to see Josh Sborz come on late. We started to see, Jose Leclerc come on late. The Rangers made a trade for Aroldis Chapman. They were trying literally everything they could to keep that bullpen intact while they were, jumping out of that huge lead in 2023. In 2024, we saw Jose Leclerc start the year as the Rangers closer, and it took a couple weeks, and the Rangers plugged Kirby Yates into that role, and he was absolutely phenomenal in it. They plugged David Robertson into that 8th inning role, and outside of that, Leclerc had some good outings in that 7th inning, in that 6th, 7th inning, lower leverage, not, thriving as the Rangers closer, but he has basically an entirely new bullpen this year. I mean, Dane Dunning is probably going to be a part of it, but outside of that, maybe we'll see some Jacob Latz, I would think, but I don't think we're going to see a whole lot of him early on, because I think that Marc Church needs to take that final spot in the bullpen. I mean, this guy is just throwing absolute gassed. The velocity is up on that fastball. The slider velocity is up as well. The swing and miss is just too good. And in the game, he only threw 12 pitches in that last game, 5 swings, 3 swings and misses at the slider. I mean, a 60% whiff rate. The only swing they took at his four-seam fastball, they did not touch. I mean, 3 called strikes for the fastball, 1 called strike with the slider. I mean, literally 2/3 of his pitches were either called strikes or swings and misses. They made no contact when they chased out of the zone with any of his pitches, and they weren't making good contact when they swung in the zone at his pitches. He was averaging 98 miles an hour with a fastball. That is very, very good. 97.4 miles an hour with the fastball, touching all the way up to 98.7. I think it's K-Love is the name of that radio station in Dallas. But if he keeps that velocity up, which he has through a couple of starts or a couple of outings in spring training, I mean, going 3 up, 3 down, 3 strikeouts is literally as good of an inning as you can possibly have. I don't know if it was an immaculate inning. I don't think it was because he did have a couple of balls called, but still, 3 up, 3 down, 3 strikeouts. This guy is going to pitch in the major leagues this year. I think he is going to pitch in some high leverage roles, and I think he absolutely needs to make this team out of spring training. He gives the one thing this Rangers bullpen doesn't have is elite velocity. Averaging 97.5 miles an hour. If it ticks up to 98 in some games that actually start to matter, plus that absolutely disgusting slider that he's got, this is going to be an elite weapon in the Rangers pen, hopefully for years to come. And I think those years to come need to start right freaking now. That's going to do it for today's show. Thank y'all so much for listening and subscribing. And until next time, don't forget to enjoy baseball.